Hello everyone, this is Dr. Alex Vasquez. I'd like to introduce you to the current theme for October 2014, and our theme right now is going to be food labeling and mitochondrial toxicity. The connection between those two things might not be obvious to you, but it is obvious to me, and I'll show you why it's so obvious in just a moment. Our next theme is going to be immunonutrition, and what I've done is provide a major update to my antiviral protocol that I initially published in 2009. You can see the most current version of this right now in Rheumatology Books version 3.5. This will be available in a digital download format, and the automatic updates will be provided to you, and you won't have to repurchase the antiviral protocol once it's in this new digital format. You can subscribe to receive updates automatically to your Kindle, computer, or iPhone, or other smartphone. What we're going to talk about right now is genetically modified food, and the reason this is of pressing concern right now is, as I'm sure most of you know, or many of you know, Oregon is about to have a major ballot initiative for the labeling of genetically modified food, so I thought we might as well talk about that topic since it's very timely. Speaking of time, you can see this article published 2 years ago by the Environmental Working Group in 2012 showing that Americans eat their weight every year in genetically engineered food. Now, one analogy that's been used to describe the situation is that it's basically an experiment on the entire population to have them eat these genetically modified or manipulated foods, because as you can see at the bottom of this page, shockingly, virtually no long-term health studies have been done on the consumption of genetically engineered food, and yet we collectively are allowing Americans to eat an estimated 193 pounds of genetically engineered food per year. So I think that does qualify for a nationwide experiment. As you can see here from the OregonRightToKnow.org website, they are preparing for a major ballot vote by the people on this topic. As you would expect, the corporate interests are putting millions of dollars into this. Meanwhile, we've got concerned citizens, doctors, and scientists on the other end who, of course, don't have deep pockets like that, but would still like to defend the American right to know what people are actually eating. I think we would all agree that few rights are more fundamental than knowing what we're putting in our mouth, and some people would have it such that you wouldn't know what you're putting in your mouth. Could be genetically modified or manipulated foods with the associated chemicals. And actually, for the subject of this video, the focus on chemicals is actually going to take center stage in just a moment. Here's another resource you can use. This is one of the television stations in Oregon, Coin 6, and you can see some information that they've provided on their website, whether or not to label these genetically manipulated foods. Again, considering the fact that Americans are eating their entire body weight in these foods, actually more than their body weight in these foods, I would think that based on basic principles of medical ethics, for example, one of those principles is autonomy. Well, people cannot make autonomous decisions if they don't have the information upon which to base those decisions. So, I mean, if we look at the topic of genetically modified food labeling from a medical ethics standpoint, then it's pretty much a no-brainer that in order for people to make independent and autonomous decisions, again, when we look at the pillars of medical ethics, autonomy is usually listed as the first of those pillars. People can only make autonomous decisions if they have appropriate information. So by blocking people from having that information, we're basically depriving them from an ethical standpoint of being autonomous human beings. Furthermore, if we look at some more research, such as what I've presented to you here, this is an article from Scientific American. Weed-whacking herbicide proves deadly to human cells, and the herbicide in question, of course, is glyphosate, which other research has shown suppresses the cytochrome P450 detoxification system and would therefore be expected to contribute to other diseases. One of those conditions could be, and this is somewhat theoretical, but it could be associated with the increased incidence lately that we've seen of celiac disease and gluten intolerance, as well as other food allergies. Here's the original article actually showing that glyphosate in a very low concentration, a 450-fold dilution, caused DNA damage in human tissue cultures. So that would correlate, of course, therefore, with anticipated damage in following human exposure. Many of you who are familiar with my work know that I have focused over the last couple of years on the topic of inflammation. I recently updated my work in a textbook of about 700 pages called Functional Inflammology with a short excerpt from that book on dysbiosis in human disease. I've recently updated my integrative rheumatology textbook as Naturopathic Rheumatology version 3.5, and an excerpt of this material is also available in a shorter book called Functional Medicine Rheumatology 3.5, but that represents the most current manifestation of my functional inflammology protocol and paradigm. One component of that model is mitochondrial dysfunction. You can see this article that I published in Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine in January of 2014. Mitochondrial medicine arrives to prime time in clinical care. So I invite you to take a look at this article. It's available on the website page that you can see at the bottom of this screen right now. One of the components of mitochondrial dysfunction is another topic called endoplasmic reticulum stress, which I've diagrammed here from my books. And you'll see that one of the contributors to endoplasmic reticulum stress is xenobiotic exposure. Xenobiotics are foreign chemicals like herbicides, pesticides, things that we're exposed to, and those cause not only mitochondrial dysfunction but also a relatively newer topic that we're increasingly concerned with called endoplasmic reticulum stress. Again, this is well drawn out in my books. Endoplasmic reticulum stress leads to something called the unfolded protein response, which is basically a pro-inflammatory response that contributes to mitochondrial dysfunction, and then mitochondrial dysfunction also creates a vicious cycle here that feeds back into endoplasmic reticulum stress and additional oxidant stress and inflammation, as you can see diagrammed here. So mitochondrial dysfunction is considered to be a pivotal component of sustained or chronic inflammatory disease. And I've diagrammed that here, again, from one of my more recent books, or actually several of my more recent books. So what I'd like to help you do right now is understand the connection between mitochondrial dysfunction, food choices, and chemicals in the environment. So here I've got a picture of Colombian corn. I'll tell you about some things that have happened here in Colombia recently. Back in America, the trend, of course, has been the consumption and production and therefore, of course, profitable sale of these genetically modified foods. You can see here these were mostly introduced into the market around 1996. And now by 2014, genetically modified soybeans are almost 100% of the soybean market in the U.S. You could say the same thing for genetically modified cotton. It's getting pretty close to 100%. And also BT corn and HT corn, if you look at those are at least 80% now of the American food market. And I know that many of us love nature and many of us are passionate about healthy foods, but the fact is the environment's become contaminated with these chemicals associated with the planting and raising of genetically modified food. So I'd like to talk about what some of the possible implications of that could be. If you look at this article from Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry in June of 2014, you see that glyphosate and its degradation product, AMPA, were detected in more than 75% of air and rain samples. And you can see that the chemical mix that patients are exposed to just in their rainwater, river water, and air, and this was done in Mississippi, so this is representative of a portion of the United States. You can see that this chemical soup that people are having to drink and breathe is dominated by glyphosate. So I think we'd all reasonably have some reason to be concerned about this. If people are drinking and breathing and eating glyphosate, then we'd want to know what that does. Here's an article that you can download from the internet for free called Detection of Glyphosate Residues in Animals and Humans, showing that food animals and farm animals and, of course, humans are beginning to show signs of accumulating glyphosate. And again, this is largely associated with the planting of genetically modified foods. One of the concerns that we've had here in South America is the fact that genetically modified foods and the chemicals that go along with them have been incorporated into some free trade agreements. And when this was starting to be implemented in 2013, it left a lot of the poor farmers kind of in a state of panic because they couldn't afford the chemicals that go along with these foods. They were being forced by law to destroy their own food supplies, and so they protested and tried to get some public sympathy for this, and that cost the lives of 12 people who were killed during the protests. If you want to see this information online, you can certainly do that. I've given you the address here of a video that describes what happened. You can also look here in a magazine called Rolling Stone, which describes the U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement, along with the requirement that these poor campesinos, the farmers, have to use genetically modified foods, or seeds, I should say. They have to use genetically modified seeds engineered by international conglomerates like Monsanto and DuPont. If you want more history on kind of what's happened between the U.S. and South America, a series of videos is available. And you can see this one in particular, America's Backyard, Colombia, along with this other documentary, which was actually done by a local college student, talking about what happened when the national farmers were forced to destroy their own food supply in favor of these genetically modified foods. My concern is looking at the research and showing what might be a consequence of exposure to these associated chemicals. So what I will invite you to do is pause the video anytime you want if you want to look at the details of this research. What I'm going to show you are abstracts or summaries of research, and all of these are derived exactly as they were published in the database run by the United States Library of Medicine. So I encourage you to take a look at the source if you'd like to do that. Let's fast forward and focus in on the combination of glyphosate with a so-called inert chemical called TN20, which, as you can see from the bottom line, aggravates mitochondrial damage and induces cell death either via apoptosis or necrosis. So that's another piece of support we have supporting our concern about this whole chemical soup that people are eating, drinking, and breathing. You can see here from Environmental Toxicology and Pharmacology 2012 September, another step toward glyphosate-induced epidermal cell death, mitochondrial and oxidative mechanisms. Here's the article that I had summarized previously from its original text, showing that a 450-fold dilution of spraying of glyphosate was shown to cause DNA damage in these epithelial cells from humans. Here's another article from Chemical Research Toxicology 2009. Glyphosate formulations induce apoptosis and necrosis, so that basically means cell death, in human umbilical, embryonic, and placental cells. And finally, let's look at one of the earlier articles on this topic, published back in 2005, showing uncoupling of oxidative phosphorylation secondary to exposure to Roundup, which is a herbicide formulation that includes glyphosate along with other so-called inert chemicals. So what the research has basically shown is that glyphosate has a certain level of toxicity, but when it's mixed in with other chemicals in this formulation, it's even more toxic than any of the individual chemicals would represent if tested by itself. Oddly enough, and in direct opposition to medical ethics, the American Medical Association has come out against labeling genetically modified foods, which is odd because, as I mentioned before, one of the pillars of medical ethics, which is the standards that medical physicians are supposed to follow, one of the primary pillars of medical ethics is autonomy, and we all know that one of the components of autonomy is education, so that if people don't even know what they're eating, then they cannot possibly make autonomous decisions. So the fact that the American Medical Association would come out against labeling genetically modified foods is actually contradicting the very premise of medical ethics. And it's not the first time that that's happened. If you look at this article from the American Journal of Public Health, it documents the connection between the American Medical Association and the tobacco industry, wherein the American Medical Association used to have a very comfortable relationship, financial relationship with the tobacco industry. Again, you can look at the history of this in the American Journal of Public Health, February 2006 edition. You can also just look on the internet and you can see evidence for the tobacco industry and the American Medical Association working together. You can also access a very excellent book called Serpent on the Staff, The Unhealthy Politics of the American Medical Association. So again, my main concern is the treatment of inflammatory diseases, and we all within this work appreciate the role of mitochondrial dysfunction. And therefore, if we're going to appreciate the role of mitochondrial dysfunction, then we of course have to appreciate the role of xenobiotics, which includes herbicides and pesticides, within this pathogenic model of sustained or so-called chronic inflammation. And when you look at it from that perspective, this important topic of labeling genetically modified foods and therefore allowing the consumer base to be aware of what it's eating and the chemicals it's being exposed to, I think becomes very relevant. Again, Americans are eating their body weight in these genetically modified foods every year. Associated with these foods are glyphosate and other chemicals. You can see that these chemicals are becoming very permeating throughout the environment, now being found in more than 75% of air and rain samples, according to the study conducted in Mississippi, published in 2014. So I think we have some legitimate reasons to be concerned here. So again, I invite you to look at that research. For those of you who are clinicians, you might want to look at some of the protocols I've recently published on inflammation and rheumatology. And that pretty much summarizes what I wanted to say in today's update. I just covered food labeling, again, encouraging you to support the measure in Oregon. Whether you live in Oregon or not, I think we all need to show some, national solidarity as Americans and work together. This is not just a individual city or individual state issue. It's an issue that affects everyone in the nation. And so I just wanted to provide some support and an update on that topic of food labeling and how that is connected with mitochondrial toxicity via the chemicals that are applied to those foods. Our next theme, which will probably be later this month in October of 2014, will be immunonutrition. Again, I will provide an update to my antiviral protocol, first published in 2009. This has already been published in Rheumatology version 3.5, but I'm going to go even beyond that and provide this in a digital download format, which will provide updates without having to repurchase the work. So I'm pretty excited about that new format. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to being in contact with you.